My life isn't exactly a thrilling saga, but whenever the topic of genuinely terrifying experiences comes up, I always find myself recounting this one. It happened just before my sophomore year of high school, when I was a raw, impressionable 15. I grew up in a coastal town that thrived under the summer sun, a vibrant tapestry of tourists, ice cream vendors, and the incessant hum of the boardwalk. But come autumn, it transformed into a desolate canvas of closed-up businesses and echoing silence. The only inhabitants left were us, the locals, alongside the vast, indifferent sky and the ceaseless roar of the ocean. There's a particular, almost ethereal beauty to a beach town in the off-season. It's an odd mix of profound emptiness and tranquil solitude, a feeling of being completely untethered from the usual bustle of human existence. Our house, somewhat clichély, sat on Surf Avenue, a mere block from the shimmering expanse of the beach. And yes, I did know how to surf. It would have been a rather pathetic irony otherwise, wouldn't it? The boardwalk and the sand were woven into the very fabric of my childhood, almost extensions of my own personality. I don't live in that specific house anymore, but it remains a family property, a tangible piece of my past that still tugs at something deep inside me. Back then, I was fiercely dedicated to the high school varsity cross-country team, and my commitment to fitness bordered on obsessive, even during the sweltering summer off-season. Running in the oppressive humidity of a Jersey Shore summer was a special kind of hell, so I'd typically schedule my runs for the pre-dawn hours or late at night. These were the times when the air was cooler, less likely to suffocate me, and the boardwalk was blessedly free of the meandering crowds that made dodging tourists a perilous sport. That particular night, a late run was my only option. I'd been out late with friends the night before, a blur of cheap pizza and whispered secrets under the streetlights, which led to me sleeping in far past my usual rigorous schedule. My Garmin watch, a clunky, dependable relic that probably no longer exists, was my sole companion on these runs, meticulously tracking my distance and pace. I never carried my phone. Even that minuscule extra weight felt like an anchor, throwing off my rhythm. The only other thing I'd bring were my house keys, a non-negotiable accessory forced upon me by my parents' almost paranoid insistence on keeping the house locked at all times, even when they were home. It was a peculiar fixation for a private beach town, typically a haven of safety and low crime, but I'd learned long ago that arguing was futile. I chose the boardwalk that night, its wooden planks offering a surface firm enough to be forgiving on my joints but not as brutal as the shifting sands of the beach. Sometimes when I felt particularly masochistic, I'd tackle the beach for a challenge, but not tonight. Tonight called for a smooth, easy, long run, a meditative exercise with minimal elevation changes or tricky terrain. The boardwalk promised just that. After a few miles, I drifted into that sublime, almost trance-like state known to runners as the runner's high. It's a euphoric disconnect, a sensation I still describe to people today. Once you push past that initial mental wall, typically around the 3-mile mark, the rest of the run transforms into something bordering on enjoyable. I was lost in the rhythmic slap of my shoes against the wood, my mind a blank canvas, occasionally registering the distant, soothing sigh of the ocean. I was in that perfect flow, where the act of running ceased to be a conscious effort, when a faint, metallic clink pierced my reverie. My stride faltered, then stopped. My hand instinctively went to my shorts pocket. Empty. My stomach plummeted, a lead weight dragging me down. My keys. My precious, non-negotiable house keys. I crouched, peering through the narrow gaps between the boardwalk planks. It was a futile gesture. The darkness beneath was absolute, an inky void, and even if I could see them, retrieving them from this vantage point was impossible. A string of curses, raw and guttural, spilled from my lips. I know, a bit dramatic for a misplaced set of keys, but the adrenaline from the run was still coursing through my veins, amplifying my frustration. This detour, this idiotic stumble, had shattered my perfect run. And more importantly, the thought of facing my parents without those keys sent a cold shiver down my spine. They would absolutely kill me. So, without a second thought, driven by a desperate mix of fear and adolescent stubbornness, I vaulted over the side of the boardwalk, dropping down onto the soft, cool sand below. It was also a matter of pride. Who just walks away from their belongings, especially something as crucial as house keys? Not me. Not then. The moment my feet hit the sand, the air under the boardwalk assaulted my senses. It was a thick, cloying stench, a nauseating cocktail of rotten seaweed and stale beer, the kind that sticks to the back of your throat. Imagine filling a bathtub with that putrid mixture and then submerging yourself in it. It was damp, heavy, and each step I took sent up plumes of sand and unseen debris, the detritus of countless summer nights. Without my phone, the faint backlight of my Garmin watch was my only guide, a meager beacon in the oppressive gloom. It did little to illuminate the vast, cavernous space beneath the boardwalk. I knelt, trying to pinpoint the exact spot where I'd heard the clink, hoping to find my keys nestled in the sand. But there was nothing, just more clumps of soggy sand and glinting shards of discarded garbage. It was truly disgusting, but the urgency of the situation superseded my revulsion. I considered giving up, the sheer unpleasantness of my surroundings warring with the dread of facing my parents. But I had come this far. To turn back now, to abandon the search after enduring this wretched stench and grime, would be to admit defeat, to have gotten covered in filth for absolutely nothing. That thought was unacceptable. I began to sift through the sand with my hands, blindly raking my fingers through the gritty muck, hoping the keys had simply been buried beneath the surface. Minutes stretched into an eternity, and frustration, sharp and bitter, began to gnaw at me. Had I really misjudged the spot by such a margin? It seemed the most rational explanation. In my zoned-out runner's high, my internal GPS had gone haywire. Defeated for the moment, I scrambled back up onto the boardwalk, dusted myself off, and stood precisely where I'd stopped running. I needed a better strategy, a foolproof method to pinpoint the exact drop zone. That's when a seemingly brilliant idea sparked in my mind. My shoelace. I could use it as a marker. I knelt, fumbling with the wet knot, then carefully threaded the lace through a narrow crack between the planks, letting it dangle below, a visible guide for my subterranean expedition. That way I could crawl back under and easily spot it, leading me directly to the coveted keys. As I pushed myself back upright, preparing for my second descent, something tugged. A distinct, sharp pull on the lace. It vanished, instantly swallowed by the darkness. Not a gust of wind, not some awkward movement of my own. Something from below had actively pulled it. My breath hitched in my throat. I stood frozen, eyes wide, staring at the empty gap where my shoelace had just been. It couldn't be. Someone or something was under the boardwalk. A sickening realization dawned on me. Whoever was down there, they likely had my keys too. My first, most primal instinct screamed at me to run, to sprint home and deal with the ramifications later. But the thought of some unknown entity possessing my house keys, of them knowing exactly where I lived, where my family slept, sent a cold wave of fury through me. Our address was clearly etched into the metal of the keychain. I couldn't just leave a stranger with that kind of access. To this day, I can't fully rationalize my next action. Call it the foolish, unyielding confidence of a teenager, or perhaps a desperate surge of adrenaline-fueled bravado. But I took a deep, shaky breath, jumped back down onto the sand, and crawled under the boardwalk once more. This time the atmosphere was different. The air felt heavier, thicker, almost charged with an unseen presence. My senses were heightened, each strand of hair on my arms standing on end. I was bracing myself not just for the stench and the grime, but for some kind of confrontation. I pushed forward, blindly navigating the uneven terrain. Then a faint shuffling sound somewhere ahead of me to my left. My chest tightened, a cold knot of dread forming in my stomach. I swung the weak beam of my watch light towards the sound, but it revealed nothing but endless sand and the dark, imposing beams of the boardwalk structure. I kept moving, my heart thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Then the shuffling again, this time from a different direction to my right. It wasn't coming from one spot. There were multiple sources, multiple people. Under here. That was it. Common sense, a fleeting visitor in my adrenaline-addled mind, hit me with the force of a freight train. What in the world had I expected to happen? Was I truly going to engage in a confrontation with unknown individuals lurking beneath a deserted boardwalk in the dead of night? It was suicide. I spun around, desperate to escape, trying to quell the rising tide of panic. But before I could fully orient myself towards the exit, something cold, something shockingly cold, clamped onto my ankle. A hand. My scream was raw, guttural, choked off by terror as fingernails, sharp and brittle, dug into my skin. I didn't think, I reacted. I kicked as hard as my legs would allow, a desperate, flailing blow. My foot connected with something solid and the grip on my ankle released. I scrambled, propelled by pure, unadulterated terror, my legs and arms scraping against the rough sand and splintered wood as I clawed my way out from under the oppressive darkness and into the open air. I didn't stop running. I sprinted, a wild, unthinking blur, straight back to my house. My lungs burned, each breath a searing gasp in the cool night air. The rhythm of my feet on the pavement was a frantic drumbeat, a counterpoint to the thunderous pounding in my chest. I didn't glance back, not once, convinced that if I did, some shadowy figure would be right there, a spectral presence gaining on me. The thought of being followed, of that cold hand reaching out again, fueled my desperate flight. Every shadow seemed to stretch and contort, transforming into something menacing, and the familiar streetlights cast long, predatory fingers across the deserted suburban landscape. My mind raced, replaying the grotesque image of that hand, the feel of those nails, the suffocating darkness under the boardwalk. What kind of person or people would be lurking there in such a place at such an hour? The questions swirled, unanswered, only intensifying my terror. When I finally reached my front door, I didn't bother with the keys, the very object of my recent torment. I hammered on the solid wood, a desperate, rhythmic pounding that echoed through the quiet night. My knuckles ached, but I didn't stop until the porch light flickered on and my father, his face a mask of bewildered annoyance, yanked the door open. To say he was pissed would be a colossal understatement. He was livid, his eyes blazing with a mixture of anger and concern at my disheveled appearance and frantic demeanor. I braced myself for the inevitable lecture, the grounding, the torrent of "I told you so's." But before he could fully erupt, before he could even form a coherent sentence, the words tumbled out of me, a torrent of fear and explanation. The keys, the shoelace, the shadows, the shuffling, the people under the boardwalk. The commotion, my choked sobs and my father's booming voice roused my mother. She appeared in the hallway, her face initially contorted with fury at being woken at such an hour, but as her gaze fell upon the raw, red marks clawed into my ankle, her expression shifted. The anger melted away, replaced by something closer to pure, unadulterated fear. Her eyes, wide and disbelieving, met my father's, and a silent understanding passed between them. My father, ever the pragmatist, didn't waste a second. He pulled out his phone, his jaw set, and called the police. The next morning, a locksmith arrived, a quiet, unassuming man who meticulously changed every single lock on every door and window in our house. For a couple of days, an eerie sense of normalcy returned. I convinced myself it was over, just a bizarre, messed-up night, a twisted anecdote to tell at parties, something I'd try to forget as quickly as possible. I was a teenager. I had a knack for compartmentalizing uncomfortable experiences. But then, a few mornings later, the illusion shattered. I was jolted awake by a loud, insistent knocking at the front door. It was early, far too early for any legitimate visitors. I lay in bed, heart thudding, waiting for my parents to go deal with it. When the knocking continued, relentless and unwavering, and neither of them stirred, a fresh wave of unease washed over me. Reluctantly, I pulled on a hoodie, its soft fabric doing little to soothe my frayed nerves, and crept downstairs. I peered through the peephole, my eye pressed against the tiny lens. Nothing. No one. Just the blurred outline of our porch. Confused, a cold knot tightening in my stomach, I slowly unlatched the door and pulled it open, cautiously peeking out. Still nothing. The street was empty, a silent tableau of suburban houses. No cars hummed to life, no early morning joggers, not even a stray dog. Just stillness. I was about to close the door, a sigh of exasperated relief escaping my lips, when something caught my eye, a tiny detail at the periphery of my vision. There, on the doormat, placed with an almost deliberate care, sat a shoelace. My shoelace. The one I'd threaded through the boardwalk, the one that had been snatched into the darkness. A primal, instinctual fear, colder and more potent than anything I'd felt under the boardwalk, seized me. I slammed the door shut, the resounding thud echoing through the quiet house, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. That very afternoon, a comprehensive security system was installed, a network of cameras and sensors that transformed our beach house into a fortress. 4 weeks afterward, our family lived in a state of heightened anxiety, a constant, gnawing dread lurking beneath the surface of our everyday lives. Every creak of the house, every distant siren, every unexpected shadow sent a jolt of fear through us. We checked the locks compulsively, peered through curtains, and whispered hushed conversations about what had happened. But nothing else ever occurred. No further incidents, no strange noises, no more unsettling deliveries. The fear, though palpable, eventually began to recede, replaced by a lingering unease, a faint echo of the terror that had consumed us. Even now, when I reflect on that experience, the events of that night remain stubbornly inexplicable. I can't rationalize the sequence of occurrences, the chilling discovery of the shoelace, the unseen hands. And even though I no longer reside in that house, the knowledge that some unknown stranger or strangers knows our beach house's address, that they once had our keys, sends a persistent shiver down my spine. It's a violation that lingers, a subtle, unsettling reminder of a line that was crossed, a boundary irrevocably breached. The thing about existing in a beach town during the off-season is the profound sense of desertion that blankets everything. The vibrant throngs of tourists have long since evaporated, leaving behind a skeletal landscape of boarded-up storefronts and the mournful cry of gulls. The boardwalk, once the pulsating heart of summer, transforms into an empty, echoing expanse, a desolate skeleton of its former self. Yet for me there was a profound peace in this emptiness. It became my sanctuary, a place where I could shed the accumulated stresses of life. 4 years, my late-night runs on the boardwalk when it was truly abandoned, were my ritualistic detox. There's a particular kind of solace in being utterly alone, the rhythmic slap of my sneakers against the weathered wooden planks, the ceaseless whisper of the waves, a lullaby that made me feel as though the entire world belonged to me. Tonight was no different. The air was crisp, carrying the familiar scent of salt and damp wood, a comforting balm after a long, draining day. The only illumination came from the occasional street lamp, their faint, buzzing hum casting long, lonely shadows that stretched and danced in the periphery of my vision. I was perhaps a mile into my run when that familiar prickle of unease began, that visceral knowing that you're no longer alone. It's a sensation that bypasses rational thought, a primal instinct that whispers of unseen eyes. I glanced over my shoulder, a quick, almost involuntary movement. And there, in the murky distance, stood a man. Not walking, not moving, simply standing there on the boardwalk, facing directly towards me. My throat constricted, a dry swallow catching in my windpipe. I turned back around, shaking my head, attempting to dismiss it as nothing. Probably just another local, an insomniac like myself, taking a solitary stroll. But even as I rationalized, a deep, crawling unease settled in the pit of my stomach. No matter the explanation, it was an undeniably eerie sight. I maintained my pace, but minutes later the sensation of being watched returned, stronger this time, more insistent. My heart began to thud, not from the exertion of my run, but from something far more unsettling. The compulsion to turn around again, to confirm my burgeoning fears, thickened in the air around me. So I turned. He was closer now, noticeably closer. Still not moving, still just standing there facing me. A profound, chilling disquiet permeated my every cell. I picked up my pace, pulling the single earbud from my ear, silencing the gentle cadence of my music. My feet pounded against the wood, a desperate drumbeat, my breath coming in ragged gasps. But every few moments I heard them. Footsteps behind me, a distinct, rhythmic cadence, perfectly in sync with my own. I risked another glance. He was even closer. Yet still he remained perfectly, unnervingly still. I broke into a full sprint, my legs churning, muscles screaming in protest. The seemingly endless stretch of boardwalk, once a comforting expanse, now felt like an inescapable trap, stretching too far in both directions. My car, my only salvation, was parked at the very end, nestled near the beach entrance. I just had to reach it. I ran harder than I ever had before, my lungs burning with each desperate inhale, my legs screaming for respite. But I refused to stop. Every few seconds I twisted my head just enough to check, and each time he was incrementally closer. Still standing, still watching. I couldn't comprehend how he was able to stop so suddenly, to freeze in place the instant I turned. It defied logic. My focus narrowed, no longer concerned with where I was going, only with getting away, with putting as much distance as possible between myself and that unmoving, watching figure. The boardwalk exit, a beacon of hope in the suffocating darkness, finally materialized in my strained vision. I nearly sobbed in relief, a desperate, guttural sound catching in my throat as I spotted the familiar silhouette of my car. My hands fumbled for my keys, shaking so violently that pressing the unlock button became an agonizing, impossible task. Finally, with a desperate prayer, the car lights flashed, a glorious, illuminating affirmation. I yanked the door open, throwing myself inside with a desperate lunge, slamming it shut behind me, the dull thud a comforting finality against the encroaching dread. I shoved the key into the ignition, turning it with a frantic twist. The engine roared to life, a beautiful, comforting growl that chased away some of the suffocating silence. I backed the car out of the spot, my heart still hammering, but a sliver of relief beginning to bloom in my chest. As I shifted into drive, ready to whip the wheel to the left and peel out of there, I glanced ahead, a final, quick check. And there he was, the man, standing directly in front of my car, precisely where it had just been parked. It was a fleeting glimpse, so quick that my mind barely registered any discernible features. All I saw was the hood pulled low, obscuring most of his face, a featureless void in the dim light. A primal scream tore through my mind, unvoiced. I cranked the wheel to the left, a frantic, desperate maneuver, and the car almost spun out as I fishtailed out of the parking spot and onto the main road. The entire drive home was a blur of adrenaline and raw terror. I didn't care about speed limits, about red lights, about swerving or nearly losing control. All that mattered was distance. I just drove, a desperate, headlong flight from the unseen threat. I didn't dare look back, convinced that if I did, his hooded figure would be there, a silent, relentless pursuer in my rearview mirror. When I finally reached the blessed sanctuary of my house, I moved with a feverish intensity, locking every door, every window, every conceivable entrance. The house, usually a haven of comfort, now felt like a fragile barrier against a lurking menace. Sleep that night was an impossibility, a luxury my rattled nerves couldn't afford. The subsequent nights were no better, plagued by vivid, visceral nightmares in which that man, or variations of his faceless form, appeared, always watching, always chasing. My mind, unable to conjure a concrete image of his face, filled in the blanks with grotesque, distorted features, none of them pretty. I haven't done a winter run on that boardwalk since. The once peaceful, solitary expanse is now irrevocably tainted, a place where a chilling encounter shattered the illusion of safety. This happened last summer, during a weekend escape to the shore with a group of friends. We'd managed to snag the cheapest Airbnb we could find, a charmingly dilapidated cottage with a perpetual scent of damp sand and salt. It was the final night of our stay and we'd spent the evening on the beach, gathered around a crackling bonfire, the air thick with laughter, music, and the clinking of bottles. Nothing too wild, just the easy camaraderie of youth. As the embers died down and the stars began to fade, most of my friends were ready to call it a night. But I wasn't tired yet. I figured a walk, a chance to clear my head and walk off the lingering buzz, would be the perfect prelude to sleep. The boardwalk at night, in the off-season, possessed a strange, almost ethereal tranquility. Everything was empty, a stark contrast to the daytime chaos I was accustomed to from my limited beach visits. It was all so new, so intriguing. After aimlessly wandering for a while, soaking in the desolate beauty of the deserted boardwalk, a more pressing, far less poetic need arose. I had to pee, and badly. I'm not exactly the type to relieve myself in public, a fact my friends frequently teased me about, so this presented a bit of a dilemma. My eyes scanned the shadows until they landed on one of the public boardwalk bathrooms. It was an old, beat-up structure, barely illuminated, its very presence radiating an aura of neglect. Not ideal, but holding it until I got back to the Airbnb was simply not an option. I pushed the door open, a grating squeal of rusted hinges echoing in the silence, and immediately regretted my decision. The place reeked, a noxious blend of industrial-strength bleach attempting, and failing miserably, to mask something far more offensive. I resolved to make it quick, choosing the farthest stall, hoping for a modicum of privacy. That's when I heard it, the door creak open again. I winced, annoyed that my brief solitude was now infringed upon. I listened intently as slow, deliberate footsteps began to circle the cramped space. They seemed to be moving with an unsettling aimlessness, almost as if they were exploring the contours of the room. At times, the footsteps appeared to emanate from multiple directions, creating a disorienting sensation, making me question if there was more than one person in there. But I couldn't be sure. Eventually, the footsteps ceased, stopping abruptly near the sinks. Just stopped. No movement, no coughs, no sounds of fidgeting. The water didn't turn on either, leaving me utterly baffled as to their purpose. I finished up, desperate to escape the putrid air and the unsettling presence, but when I went to push the stall door open, it wouldn't budge. I jiggled the flimsy latch, then shoved it with more force, but the door remained stubbornly stuck. A wave of frustration, laced with a growing sense of unease, surged through me. I wanted to punch the flimsy metal, to unleash my growing anger and discomfort. Then the footsteps started again, closer this time, and a raw, visceral dread tightened its icy grip around my chest. It felt as if an unseen weight pressed against the outside of the door, as though someone was deliberately holding it shut. I braced myself, charging the door with all the force I could muster, a desperate, flailing attempt to break free. It finally gave way, sending me stumbling out of the stall and into the dimly lit, reeking bathroom. As I burst out, disoriented and gasping, I caught a fleeting glimpse of the main bathroom door swinging shut, a soft click echoing in the sudden silence, as if someone had just exited. I spun around, scanning the cramped space. It was now empty. The person or people who had been circling, who had seemingly held my stall door shut, were gone. A fresh wave of panic, cold and sharp, washed over me. I hastily washed my hands, the cold water doing little to calm my racing pulse, and strode towards the exit. My hand closed around the door handle, twisting it. Nothing. It wouldn't budge. The handle wouldn't even turn, as if the bathroom had been locked from the outside. I froze, my mind a chaotic whirlwind of possibilities. Was this some kind of sick prank? My initial thought was one of my friends messing with me, but it didn't make sense. They had all left already, and none of them had seen me slip away to the bathroom. Besides, this wasn't really their brand of humor. Either way, I was thoroughly freaked out. Gritting my teeth, I began to pound on the door, my desperate shouts echoing in the oppressive silence. "Hey, open up. Let me out." But there was no response. Just the unsettling quiet. Just then, I heard a faint movement in one of the stalls behind me. My head whipped around, my eyes darting towards the sound. Even though I couldn't see anything beneath the stall doors, I knew with a certainty that chilled me to the bone that there was a person in one of those stalls. That meant there had been two people in there the whole time. My eyes scanned the narrow gaps beneath the doors again. No feet. No ankles. That could only mean they were standing on one of the toilets, a far more concerning realization. My thoughts raced, a frantic kaleidoscope of fear and adrenaline. Call the police? No, safety first. I needed to escape. I was in danger. My eyes darted around, desperately searching for an alternative. Then I saw it, a grimy, small window set high up near the ceiling. It wasn't large, barely more than a rectangular slit, but it was my only option. I scrambled onto the sink beneath it, the porcelain groaning ominously under my weight, threatening to collapse. With a desperate shove, I forced the window open, the rusted frame screeching in protest. As I was halfway out, my body awkwardly contorted, one of the stall doors burst open behind me. My eyes locked with those of a man. He was shockingly pale, his skin almost translucent, and his face was covered in a thick, matted growth of dark, wiry hair. He was dressed like a teenager in a faded t-shirt and baggy shorts, but his face, creased and lined, belonged to a man easily in his 50s. I didn't waste another second. I scrambled the rest of the way through the narrow opening, dropping down onto the gritty boardwalk with a jarring thud. My knee hit the ground hard, sending a sharp jolt of pain through me, but I didn't care. I just ran. I sprinted, fueled by pure, unadulterated terror, not stopping until I was a safe distance away, my lungs burning, my muscles screaming in protest. Once I felt a reasonable degree of safety, I pulled out my phone, my fingers fumbling, and called the police. They arrived surprisingly quickly, a testament to the efficient response time of a beach town, even in the off-season. But by the time they checked the bathroom, the man and his unseen accomplice were long gone. That particular stretch of the boardwalk was deserted, devoid of surveillance cameras or open shops that late at night, leaving no digital breadcrumbs to follow. I recounted the terrifying ordeal, my voice still shaky, pointing to the stall, to the window, to the locked door. One of the officers, a gruff but sympathetic man, pointed to faint scratch marks on the bathroom door handle, saying it looked as though someone had indeed tampered with it, attempting to jam the mechanism. We all agreed, whoever it was, they hadn't wanted me to leave. It wasn't the most comforting observation. The officers commended my quick thinking in escaping through the window, and that was that. I had to leave the beach the next day, and I never received any kind of update on the situation. I doubted the police even truly investigated much further. The unsettling experience, however, remained seared into my memory, a chilling reminder of how quickly a seemingly peaceful night can turn into a nightmare. I apologize in advance if some of the details of this story are a little fuzzy. It happened when I was really young, so my memory isn't as sharp as it could be. I don't remember my exact age, perhaps 8 or 9, but I know it was during one of those idyllic summers my family spent at my grandparents' sprawling beach house. It was a kind of family hub, a magnet that drew in siblings, cousins, aunts, and uncles for weekends or even entire weeks at a time. The house itself wasn't particularly fancy. It was old, a bit worn, but it boasted a labyrinthine layout with what felt like 1,000,000 bedrooms, easily accommodating our boisterous, ever-expanding clan. Its greatest asset, however, was its proximity to the beach. I'd spend entire days there, lost in the simple joys of building sandcastles, chasing waves, and exploring the quiet neighborhood on my beat-up bike. Every summer I spent there was a sun-drenched dream, a blissful, extended fever dream that now, as I grow further and further removed from that innocent childhood, feels almost impossibly distant. That particular summer, however, was different. There was a buzz of apprehension in the air, a looming threat whispered in adult conversations. A massive hurricane, forecasted months in advance, was churning somewhere out in the vast ocean. It had all the beach towns scrambling, frantically implementing precautions. Our town, I'm not sure if others did this, embarked on an ambitious project, constructing colossal sand dunes along the shore, a makeshift barrier against the impending storm surge. Calling them dunes barely does them justice. To a child's eye, they were immense, towering like ancient castle walls. I can only imagine the surreal, almost alien aerial view of the coast during that time, a landscape transformed by these massive, man-made fortifications. That summer, these colossal sand dunes became our personal playground. My siblings and I would spend hours climbing their steep slopes, tumbling down the other side in fits of giggles, pretending we were scaling treacherous mountains or sneaking into a hidden fortress. It was a strange experience though. Usually, standing on the boardwalk facing the beach, you could see the endless expanse of the ocean stretching out before you, a shimmering, boundless horizon. But these dunes, they completely blocked the view. You'd walk along the boardwalk expecting to see the cerulean waters, and instead, you were met with an imposing, impenetrable wall of sand. The beach itself also had strict closing hours. Once the lifeguards packed up their chairs and blew their final whistles, people weren't technically permitted to go on the beach. But that rule, like so many others in our laid-back town, never really stopped us locals. Our town was safe, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and letting kids roam freely wasn't considered a big deal, especially after the throngs of tourists thinned out. As long as we promised not to venture into the ocean, our parents were usually content. And to be honest, I was a bit of a little troublemaker back then, constantly testing boundaries, especially when I thought I could get away with it. That youthful rebellion is what led me to sneak out that evening. It wasn't dark yet, the sun hadn't even begun its descent, but I hadn't asked permission to go out. I just wanted some alone time, a moment of quiet away from the perpetual chaos of a house filled with boisterous family. I think I'd gotten into a squabble with one of my brothers, a forgotten disagreement that spurred my desire for escape. The sliding door downstairs, where all the kids' bedrooms were, made it ridiculously easy to come and go unnoticed. My older cousins had practically written the playbook on nocturnal excursions, usually for far more rebellious reasons than a solo beach walk, but I'd learned from them. Even today, we still laugh about how effortlessly we could sneak people in and out of that house without alerting the adults. As quietly as I could, I slipped outside, my bare feet sinking slightly into the warm, soft sand of the yard. I didn't even bother with shoes. I made my way towards the boardwalk, expecting to encounter some locals, perhaps even some kids my age. Even after beach hours, there were usually a few people around, anyone who owned or was staying in a house down there. I was surprised then by the utter emptiness. It was strangely quiet, eerily deserted. Not a single soul outside. It felt as though the entire beach had gone to sleep. I walked along the boardwalk for a while, my gaze sweeping the horizon, half expecting to see someone, anyone. But I never did. It was literally like the whole beach had gone to sleep that night, an unnatural stillness that pricked at my young mind. I was about to head back, a faint whisper of unease beginning to stir within me, when I noticed something alarming. A thin trail of smoke, dark and wispy, was rising from beyond one of the towering sand dunes. At first, I dismissed it as fog, a common occurrence at the shore, but I took a closer look, narrowing my eyes. No, it was definitely smoke. Smoke from a fire. Smoke on the beach wasn't entirely unusual, even though it was strictly against beach rules and bordered on illegal. Sometimes tourists would sneak into light bonfires, but there was something about the profound emptiness of that night, the unnerving stillness, that made the smoke feel wrong. To my young mind, it looked almost like a volcano, the smoke emanating ominously from the very heart of the sand dune. I looked around for an adult, for anyone, but there was no one. Just the empty boardwalk stretching out in both directions, a silent, indifferent witness. I should have gone home. Every rational instinct screamed at me to turn back, to forget what I had seen. But curiosity, that powerful, irresistible force, got the better of me. Plus, my parents had always instilled in me the importance of never turning my back on someone in need, and this situation, in its own strange way, felt like that. Something was amiss. I began to climb the sand dune, choosing a spot a little ways away from the rising smoke, my bare feet sinking into the soft, shifting sand with each laborious step. By the time I reached the summit, I was covered in grit, my clothes clinging uncomfortably. I peered down the other side, and there it was, just as I'd anticipated, a bonfire. But it was the eerie isolation of it that sent a shiver down my spine. There was no one around. No beach chairs, no coolers, no discarded towels or half-eaten snacks. Just a fire, burning brightly in the middle of an otherwise empty beach, as if whoever had lit it had simply vanished, abandoning it to its own devices. It didn't sit right with me even at that tender age. I knew instinctively that leaving a fire like that unattended was dangerous, a reckless act. I slid down the dune, a controlled tumble that sent sand flying, and made my way over to the glowing embers. I stood there for a second, just staring at it, my young mind struggling to comprehend the scene. I didn't know what else to do, so I began to kick sand onto the flames, burying them, suffocating the fire until it finally died down to a smoldering heap. But I couldn't bring myself to leave just yet. My curiosity, though tinged with unease, was too strong. I couldn't fathom any reason why someone would light a fire on the beach only to abandon it, unless they were trying to conceal something, to destroy evidence of some illicit activity. I began to inspect the fire pit more closely, using a discarded stick to poke around the still warm ashes, and that's when I made some truly eerie discoveries. First, there were clothes. Small clothes. Little kids' clothes like stuff I would wear. Tiny shoes, socks, scraps of fabric half burnt and singed. I bent down, using the stick to gingerly prod the charred remnants. I realized with a growing sense of dread that the fire had consisted mostly of these clothes, a revelation that sent a sick, cold feeling twisting in my gut. But then I saw what else had been burning. Photos. Or at least what was left of them. Most were charred beyond recognition, brittle fragments of forgotten moments. But one had miraculously survived enough for me to make out a face. It was a boy, probably around my age, with dark, curious eyes and a faint, almost imperceptible smile. He looked eerily familiar, almost like me. Like if one of my parents told me he was a distant cousin or something, I'd believe them without question. The picture made me incredibly scared, a sudden, overwhelming wave of terror washing over me. I felt an urgent, desperate need to run, to flee this unsettling scene. The stick dropped from my trembling fingers, forgotten. I was just a little kid after all. I had never experienced anything remotely this frightening before, and I was genuinely freaking out. But then it got so much worse. A voice, rough and guttural, shattered the silence. "Hey!" it shouted somewhere in the distance. I looked up, my head snapping towards the sound. There, down the beach, a man was coming toward me. He was bald, his head gleaming faintly in the twilight, but I couldn't make out much else of his face from such a distance. He was staggering with every few steps, as if battling to stay upright, as though he were drunk or worse. He yelled again, the word distorted by the distance, "Hey kid," and began to move a little more quickly towards me, his gait unsteady but determined. I couldn't move. My feet were rooted to the spot, petrified by fear. He yelled again, the words carrying more clearly this time, a chilling command, "Don't you go anywhere." That was it. That was the trigger. My young, terrified brain finally caught up to my frozen body and I bolted. I started running, scrambling towards the towering sand wall, my only hope of escape. The soft, shifting sand made running agonizingly difficult, each step a struggle, but I felt as though my life depended on it. I began to climb the dune, my hands and feet scrabbling for purchase in the loose sand, and I could hear him yelling obscene, threatening things behind me. He was getting closer, his heavy, uneven footsteps surprisingly quick. Just as I reached the very top of the dune, a searing pain shot through my ankle. I felt it, fingernails, sharp and desperate, clawing at my skin. By some sheer, impossible miracle, he never managed to get a firm grip on me. With a final, desperate surge of adrenaline, I vaulted myself over the crest of the dune, tumbling down the other side, the sand cushioning my fall. I scrambled to my feet and sprinted for the boardwalk, then ran all the way home, a blur of terror and instinct. I risked a few glances back, confirming that he wasn't following, but I kept running as if my life depended on it, the image of that burning picture and the man's desperate cries seared into my mind. When I finally reached the sanctuary of my house, I immediately went to my bedroom, closing the door behind me, and burst into tears. I wanted to tell my parents, I truly did. The words were a choked lump in my throat, but all I could think about was how I'd snuck out, how much trouble I'd be in, how their anger would overshadow my fear. So I kept my mouth shut. Looking back, I know I should have said something, anything. I should have confided in my parents at the very least. But I didn't. And as far as I know, nothing ever came of it. No news reports, no police presence on the beach the next day, no reports of missing children in the area. Nothing. I still don't know what to make of it, even though it happened so long ago. I can't help but feel like there's more to the story, a chilling truth lurking just beneath the surface. I think what terrifies me the most is how eerily similar that kid in those photos looked to me. Sometimes I wish I could go back in time, grasp my younger self by the shoulders, and tell myself to just confess everything. But that's just something I'll have to live with.